I gave my daughter a $30 million mansion, thinking it would secure her future. Instead, she kicked me out and believed she'd taken everything from me. She had no idea about the secret I was hiding. And the revenge I planned changed everything forever. Before continue, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. That's free and only way to support us. Thank you. My name is Robert Hayes, and I'm 58 years old. If you saw me on the street, you'd probably think I'm just another aging man with thinning grey hair and a calm smile, living an ordinary life in New York City. That's what most people assume when they pass me by. But behind that quiet face is a story I never thought I'd live through, a story where blood, love, betrayal, and revenge collide in ways I still struggle to believe. I've always been a man who built his own world, brick by brick, without anyone's handouts. I started my journey at 19, cleaning floors in a small electronics store, surviving on $2 sandwiches, and saving every dime I could. Years later, I was running multiple businesses, investments, real estate, startups. Everything I touched seemed to grow. But none of that mattered compared to the one thing I loved most in life, my daughter, Emma. She was my anchor, my reason to keep going after my wife passed away 12 years ago. Back then, she was still a teenager, fragile and full of dreams. I promised her I would always take care of her, no matter what. I thought giving her everything she wanted would fill the hole her mother left behind. I thought it would make her happy, safe, loved. I was wrong. When Emma turned 25, I decided to surprise her with something special. Something unforgettable. Something I thought would secure her future forever. After years of planning, searching, and negotiating, I bought her a $30 million mansion in Miami. This wasn't just any house. It was perfection wrapped in glass and stone, white marble floors that glimmered like frozen rivers. 12-foot walls of glass overlooking an endless ocean, a private infinity pool stretching toward the horizon, and chandeliers made of hand-cut crystals from Italy. It looked like a place stolen straight out of a billionaire's dream. The day I handed her the keys, I felt like the proudest father alive. I watched her fingers tremble as she touched the sleek, gold-edged box, saw the disbelief in her widened eyes as I whispered that it was hers now. She hugged me, and for a moment, I thought I saw the little girl I used to tuck into bed. That innocent smile, that sparkle, that gratitude. It was all there. Or maybe I just wanted to believe it was. For a few weeks, everything seemed perfect. Emma moved into the mansion, hosted dinner parties, posted breathtaking pictures on social media, and surrounded herself with people I had never met before, young, glamorous, and endlessly hungry for luxury. My phone buzzed less, her visits became rarer, and when we did talk, she always seemed distracted, her voice carrying this subtle edge I couldn't quite place. I brushed it off, telling myself she was just busy adjusting to her new life. But deep down, something uneasy stirred inside me. One evening, I drove down to Miami, unannounced, just to see her. I wanted to check in, make sure she was okay. The mansion looked even more stunning under the soft glow of the setting sun, but as I walked up the stone driveway, something strange happened. A security guard, someone I had never seen before, stopped me at the gate. His voice was polite but firm, his stance solid, his hand resting casually on his belt like he was ready to handle problems. I explained I was Emma's father, expecting him to wave me through, but instead, he hesitated, looked at his tablet, and asked if I was on the guest list. That moment hit me like a gut punch. My daughter's mansion had a guest list. And I wasn't on it. He made a quick call, murmured something I couldn't catch, and finally let me in. But by the time I reached the front door, the initial pride I had felt about buying this house started to sour. Emma opened the door, smiling faintly, but her eyes didn't light up like they used to. Inside, the house was buzzing with people, laughter, clinking glasses, and loud music spilling from invisible speakers. Everyone looked like they belonged in some glossy magazine, sipping champagne and talking about stock portfolios they probably didn't even own. I stood there, feeling like an outsider in a place I paid for. Emma hugged me briefly, introduced me to no one, and drifted back into the crowd. I sat in the corner for an hour, watching her move effortlessly among these strangers, her voice confident, her posture commanding, like she was the queen of this glittering kingdom. But there was no glance back at me, no sign of the girl who once sat cross-legged on my office floor, asking me endless questions about the world. It was then I started noticing something darker. The way her friends whispered when they looked at me. The little smirk one of them gave when he said, "So you're the guy who paid for all this." The possessiveness with which they clung to her, like vultures circling a prize. I left that night without saying goodbye. Driving back, the roads blurred under the rain, and I kept replaying everything in my head. I wanted to believe it was just growing pains, that she was young, overwhelmed, and maybe even trying to impress the wrong crowd. But somewhere deep inside, a cold weight settled. Something was changing. Something I couldn't stop. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. And yet, I had no idea just how deep the cracks would go. I had no idea that this gift, this $30 million gesture of love, would become the weapon that cut me to pieces. This was just the beginning. After that night at the mansion, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something had shifted. It wasn't just a father's paranoia. No, it was deeper, a heaviness in my chest I couldn't explain. I tried to ignore it. I convinced myself Emma was just growing up. Maybe she was busy, maybe she was adjusting to her new life, maybe I was overthinking things like an old man who didn't understand this new generation. But in the weeks that followed, the distance between us grew wider than the ocean outside her glass walls. Calls became shorter, her texts colder. She used to message me about everything, the smallest details of her day, the weird things she found online, the silly gossip she thought I'd find funny. Now, I'd get one-word replies, late and vague. I'd call her on Sunday mornings, something we'd done for years, and she'd answer only half the time. When she did pick up, there was always noise in the background, laughter, music, clinking glasses. Her voice was always distracted, as if she was too busy living a life I didn't belong in anymore. At first, I thought she was just caught up in excitement. But then came the little remarks. One day, she called, asking if I'd considered downsizing my Manhattan flat. She said it lightly, almost as a joke, but her tone carried something sharp beneath the sweetness. I laughed it off at first, but she kept going, saying how small and outdated my place looked compared to the houses her friends' parents owned. That one stung more than I expected. That flat wasn't just 4 walls, it was my home. It was where I raised her after her mother passed away, where we celebrated birthdays, where we spent sleepless nights watching old movies and eating instant noodles on the couch. Every corner of that place carried memories. I brushed it off with a joke, pretending it didn't matter. But after that call, I sat alone in my flat for hours, staring at the worn wooden floors, realizing just how easily she dismissed the life we once shared. Weeks passed, and whispers started reaching me through friends and old business associates. People said Emma had been introducing herself as an independent millionaire. They said she claimed she built her empire from scratch and didn't need anyone's help. I didn't want to believe it. I thought maybe people were exaggerating, twisting her words, jealous of her new lifestyle. But the more I heard, the harder it became to ignore. Then came the night that confirmed my worst fears. I decided to surprise her again, thinking maybe I was overreacting and just needed to see her face to face, to remind myself that she was still my little girl underneath all the glitz and glamour. It was a Saturday evening when I pulled up to the mansion. The driveway was lined with cars I didn't recognize, sports cars worth more than some people's houses. The bass from the music inside thumped so loudly I could feel it through the pavement. I walked up to the gate, expecting at least a warm welcome from the staff. But this time, the security guard didn't even hide his annoyance. He didn't just ask for my name, he hesitated before letting me in, double-checking with someone on the phone. By the time I got to the front door, I already felt like an intruder. Inside, the place was buzzing with energy, designer dresses, diamond watches, champagne towers, and voices dripping with arrogance. People were talking about yacht trips, private jets, and vacation homes in Monaco, laughing like money grew on trees in their backyards. I stood in the corner, scanning the room, and finally spotted Emma. She was at the center of it all, glowing under the soft lights, wearing a gown I didn't even know she owned. She looked different. Not just older or more confident, colder. When she saw me, her expression flickered for just a moment, surprise, maybe even discomfort, but it vanished so quickly I almost thought I imagined it. She walked over, hugged me briefly, and then disappeared back into her crowd. For the next hour, I sat on a velvet couch, nursing a drink I didn't even want, watching my daughter laugh and charm strangers like I wasn't even there. She didn't introduce me to anyone. Not one person. At some point, a young guy, probably in his early 30s, walked over and sat beside me. He smiled politely, glanced at Emma, and said something I'll never forget. "So, you're the guy who paid for all this." He didn't say it with gratitude. He didn't even say it with curiosity. He said it like he was mocking me, like I was some clueless old fool sitting in a palace I didn't deserve. I smiled back faintly, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. But inside, something twisted. That simple sentence carried a weight I couldn't shake. I left without saying goodbye again. Driving back that night, I tried to tell myself I was imagining things. That I was being too sensitive. That Emma still loved me the same way she always had. But no matter how much I tried to drown it out, one thought kept clawing its way to the surface. Something was wrong. And the worst part? I didn't know how deep it went yet. The next morning, I woke up to a notification on my phone. Emma had posted pictures from the party. In every photo, she was glowing, surrounded by people, champagne glasses raised high. Her caption read, "Everything I have, I earned myself." I stared at those words for a long time. The cracks weren't just forming anymore. They were spreading fast, splintering through everything I thought I knew about my daughter, my relationship with her, and the life I built for us. I didn't know it back then, but that caption was the start of the avalanche. And when it came crashing down, it wouldn't just bury me, it would bury her too. I used to believe that nothing in this world could break me. Years of building businesses, surviving failures, losing people I loved, I thought I'd seen the worst life had to offer. But nothing prepares you for the moment your own child looks at you as if you're nothing. It happened one Tuesday morning. I was in my Manhattan flat, sipping bitter black coffee, when there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a man in a suit holding a stack of documents thicker than my arm. His face was blank, professional, the kind of expression lawyers wear when they've delivered bad news too many times to care anymore. He handed me the envelope and said nothing, just gave me a polite nod and walked away. Inside were papers, legal papers. My hands trembled as I flipped through them, my heart pounding harder with each line I read. Emma had filed for power of attorney over my assets. I blinked at the words, trying to process what I was seeing. It made no sense. Power of attorney. That was something you filed when someone couldn't take care of themselves anymore, when they were sick, senile, dying. But I wasn't any of those things. Then I saw the justification section. Petitioner claims Robert Hayes is mentally unfit to manage finances. I froze. The daughter I raised, the little girl I held when she had nightmares, had gone to court claiming I'd lost my mind, just to get control of whatever money she thought I had left. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the documents, my breath shallow, my chest heavy. My phone buzzed on the table. Her name lit up the screen. I didn't pick up. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake replaying every moment of her childhood, searching for signs I had missed, red flags I had ignored. But no matter how many times I went through the memories, I couldn't find the moment when Emma stopped being my daughter and became someone else. The next day, I decided to confront her. When I arrived at the mansion, the gates were shut. The same security guard from before stood there, staring at me with a blank expression. I told him I needed to speak with my daughter. He hesitated, whispered something into his earpiece, and then shook his head. She's not available. Something in me snapped. I demanded to be let in, my voice rising despite myself. Finally, Emma appeared at the balcony above, leaning casually on the railing, a wine glass in hand. She didn't come down. She didn't even look nervous or ashamed. She just stared at me with this calm, almost bored expression, like I was some problem she thought she'd already solved. She told me I needed to move on and stop interfering in her life. She said the Miami mansion was her world now, and she had responsibilities I wouldn't understand. And then, casually, almost like an afterthought, she said the one thing I never imagined I'd hear from her. I don't owe you anything anymore. My throat went dry. I walked back to my car in silence, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the gravel crunch under my shoes. When I got home that evening, I found another envelope taped to my door. This one wasn't from a lawyer. It was from the building management. Inside was a notice of eviction. I scanned the paper, confused at first, thinking there had been a mistake. But there it was, in black and white. My daughter had gained temporary authority over one of my properties, the Manhattan flat I lived in, and she had decided to remove me from it. I packed a small bag that night. My home, the place filled with memories of my wife and Emma's childhood, wasn't mine anymore. I spent that night in my car, parked outside the very building I used to own, staring at the lit windows, wondering how it had come to this. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. But no sound came out. The humiliation burned deeper than anger. People in the building, neighbors I'd known for years, walked past without meeting my eyes. They had heard. Of course they had. Everyone in Manhattan loves a scandal, especially when it involves someone they thought had it all. For the next few days, I lived out of that car. I parked a few blocks away from the flat, hidden beneath the shadows of skyscrapers. The city never sleeps, but that week, neither did I. I lay awake every night replaying Emma's words, her expression, the way she looked at me like I was just unnecessary. She thought she had won. She thought she'd taken everything. But here's the thing Emma didn't know. She thought that $30 million house was all I had. She thought the flat she kicked me out of was my last safe place. She thought she'd stripped me bare, left me powerless. She was wrong. Because while Emma was busy playing queen of her glass palace, she had no idea that I had spent years building something far bigger than she imagined. She didn't know about the other properties. She didn't know about the offshore accounts. She didn't know about the tech investments quietly multiplying behind the scenes. She didn't know about the silent partnerships I owned in companies she'd never even heard of. While she was flaunting her wealth on social media, I was sitting on an empire she couldn't see. But that night, parked in my car under the neon lights of Manhattan, I made a decision. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't even going to confront her again. I was going to wait. I was going to watch. And then, when the time was right, I was going to take back everything. Not with anger. Not with chaos. But with silence. She wouldn't even see it coming. I tilted the car seat back, closed my eyes, and for the first time in days, I felt something cold, sharp, and steady rising inside me. It wasn't sadness anymore. It wasn't heartbreak. It was resolve. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. The night Emma kicked me out of my own flat, something inside me died, but something else woke up. For the first time in 58 years, I felt an emptiness I couldn't explain. I wasn't just hurt, I was humiliated. I wasn't just betrayed, I was erased. My daughter, the person I had sacrificed my entire life for, had treated me like a stranger. And for what? For money. For pride. I sat in my car for hours, staring at the glowing city skyline, letting the anger wash through me like a tide I couldn't control. But then, something strange happened. The anger didn't consume me. It sharpened me. I started thinking clearly, logically, like the man I used to be before I ever let emotions get in the way of business. Emma thought she had stripped me of everything. She thought the mansion was the peak of my success and the Manhattan flat was my last refuge. She believed she'd taken control of my life. She had no idea who she was dealing with. Because Emma didn't know the truth. Years before buying her that $30 million mansion, I had quietly built something far bigger than she could imagine, something no one but me knew about. I had investments scattered across places she couldn't trace. Silent stakes in 6 tech startups, 3 of which had gone public. A private portfolio of offshore accounts holding more money than the Miami mansion was worth. Ownership of 4 luxury condos under shell companies across Europe. And partnerships in businesses she didn't even know existed, hidden deep, clean, untraceable. All of this was by design. I never liked putting all my wealth under one name. I learned that lesson a long time ago, back when I lost my first fortune in a bad deal and had to rebuild from scratch. But Emma, she didn't know that story. To her, I was just a generous father who built a fortune and handed her the biggest piece of it. She thought she'd stripped me bare when she threw me out of my flat. She thought she'd reduced me to nothing. That illusion was my greatest weapon. I realized I didn't need to fight her head on. There was no point yelling, no point demanding explanations, no point begging for the love I once believed was unconditional. I didn't want her apology anymore. I wanted her downfall. And the best revenge? It isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's patient. It's the kind of revenge where your enemy smiles at you, thinking they've won, while you've already set fire to the ground beneath them, and they don't even smell the smoke until it's too late. So I began planning. The first step was information. Emma thought she was untouchable because of the mansion, the wealth, and the image she'd built for herself. But I knew her weaknesses better than anyone. I knew her spending habits, her patterns, her blind spots. I started small, checking property records, reviewing tax filings, tracing her debts. It didn't take long before the truth unfolded like an ugly map. The Miami mansion, paid for, yes. But maintaining it? That was another story. Between property taxes, staff salaries, endless utilities, and the constant shopping, Emma was bleeding cash faster than she could realize. And then there were the friends. The designer-draped parasites who clung to her side, whispering flattery while draining her accounts dry. They weren't friends, they were vultures. But Emma didn't see it. She thought they adored her. Perfect. Because I wasn't going to stop them. I was going to help them. The second step was control. I had connections, old friends from my business days who owed me favors. Quietly, I started calling in those debts. One owned a private lending firm, another ran a financial consulting company, and one had close ties with Emma's bank. Through them, I gained access to the strings of her financial world without her knowing. I didn't touch her money. I didn't need to. I just positioned myself in places where, when the time came, I could pull the right levers to make her empire collapse under its own weight. This wasn't going to happen overnight. No, revenge like this takes time. I wanted her to grow comfortable, overconfident, arrogant. I wanted her to believe she'd won, to laugh behind my back, to post pictures of her glamorous life for the world to see, while the foundation beneath her was already crumbling. Months passed, and I played my role perfectly. I stopped calling. I stopped texting. I stopped showing up. To Emma, I looked broken, defeated, irrelevant. Meanwhile, I built alliances in silence. I spoke with lawyers, accountants, and brokers. I learned where her wealth came from, where it went, and how fragile her empire really was. Every detail became a weapon, every weakness a door waiting to be unlocked. I moved pieces quietly, one by one, preparing for the day I'd flip the board entirely. Then came the final piece of information, the one detail that made everything fall into place. One evening, an old contact from a private banking firm called me with something interesting. Emma had taken out a massive loan against the Miami mansion. $30 million on paper, but with the parties, the shopping, and the endless networking events, her debts were stacking faster than her assets. She had no idea how close she was to drowning. And I wasn't going to warn her. I was going to wait until she was neck deep. Then I'd pull the ground out from under her. I spent that night walking through the empty streets of Manhattan, the city lights reflecting in puddles like shards of broken glass. I thought about the years I spent raising her, the sleepless nights, the endless sacrifices, the way I worked myself to exhaustion to give her everything she ever wanted. And now here I was, a stranger in my own story. It hurt. God, it hurt more than I could admit. But I let that pain turn into something else, something sharper, stronger. She thought I was powerless. She thought I was beaten. But what she didn't know was that I had already started building the trap she'd never escape from. The pieces were in place. The vultures circling her weren't just her fake friends anymore. I was one of them now, watching from the shadows, controlling the winds that would scatter everything she thought she owned. The game had begun. And Emma had no idea she was already losing. Revenge isn't about speed. It's about patience. Emma thought she had beaten me, that she had stripped me bare and thrown me aside like a worn-out shoe. But what she didn't understand was this: when you push a man like me into a corner, you don't weaken him. You sharpen him. After weeks of research, I had every piece of Emma's financial life mapped out like a blueprint. I knew her debts, her income streams, her fake friendships, and the fragile foundation her so-called empire was built on. Now, it was time to set the trap. The goal wasn't to destroy her instantly. That would have been too easy. No, I wanted her comfortable, overconfident, and blind to what was coming. I wanted her to feel untouchable, just long enough to dig herself into a hole so deep she couldn't climb out. I started by disappearing from her world completely. No texts. No calls. No confrontations. I stopped showing up at the mansion and avoided anywhere she might be. To Emma, it must have looked like I was broken, humiliated, defeated, irrelevant. She probably laughed about it with her friends, thinking she'd won. Good. That was exactly what I wanted. Because while she was busy flaunting her perfect life on social media, I was busy creating the perfect storm she wouldn't see until it was too late. Emma's biggest weakness wasn't her ego. It wasn't her arrogance. It was her spending. I knew exactly how much it cost to maintain that $30 million mansion. Staff salaries for the chefs, cleaners, and security. Property taxes and insurance that bled hundreds of thousands each year. Endless parties, clothes, designer bags, luxury cars, vacations. Her income wasn't coming from investments or real work. It came from small endorsement deals, a couple of speaking gigs, and the illusion of success she projected online. Without constant cash flow, her empire would collapse faster than a glass tower in an earthquake. That's where I began tightening the screws. Through quiet calls to a few financial institutions, friends I'd done favors for over the years, I positioned myself as a silent shadow behind her accounts. I didn't touch her money, not yet. But I made sure I had control points in place. The bank, one call away. The credit card companies, watching her balance climb. The lenders, waiting for my word before approving or denying anything she needed. She thought she was free. She thought she was untouchable. But little by little, I was placing her entire empire inside a glass jar, and when the time came, I'd tighten the lid. Emma trusted her friends. That was her second weakness. They weren't friends, they were leeches. They stayed close because they thought she had endless wealth. And I knew how to make people like that talk. A few calls, a few subtle investments into the right people's businesses, and suddenly, I controlled the very same influencers and socialites Emma bragged about knowing. I didn't tell them to betray her. I didn't have to. I just made sure they understood where the real money came from, and it wasn't from her. Slowly, I began to feed them little pieces of information. Emma's drowning in debt. The house isn't fully paid off. She's living on borrowed time. Gossip spreads faster than wildfire in those circles. By the time I was done, her so-called friends were smiling in her face while whispering behind her back. I didn't have to lift a finger to make her world colder. The people she trusted most would start chipping away at her confidence without even realizing they were part of my plan. Revenge isn't always about action. Sometimes, it's about doing nothing. I didn't confront her. I didn't warn her. I didn't even hint at what I knew. I let her believe everything was fine. That's the cruelest thing about silence. It makes people careless. And Emma became reckless. She started hosting bigger parties, inviting more strangers, spending more money she didn't have. She doubled down on her online image, chasing validation while the bills piled up in the background. Every time she posted a picture, wearing a new diamond bracelet, posing in front of a rented yacht, showing off designer clothes, I smiled. She was digging her own grave, and she didn't even see it. After 3 months of watching and waiting, I made my first move. Subtle, quiet, invisible. I arranged for her credit limit to be reduced, just slightly, enough to annoy her but not alarm her. Suddenly, her endless shopping sprees became a little more inconvenient. Then I pulled a few strings to delay the processing of one of her endorsement payments. That caused a ripple effect, bills bounced, late fees stacked, and her perfect world grew just a little less perfect. Emma didn't suspect me. Why would she? To her, I was out of the picture. I was the washed-up old man she'd left behind, too weak and irrelevant to touch her. Perfect. One night, I got a call from an old contact at a private investment firm. He told me something interesting. The bank holding Emma's loan on the Miami mansion was considering selling the debt to a private buyer. I didn't hesitate. I bought it. Quietly, cleanly, through one of my offshore companies, hidden behind 3 layers of shell corporations. Emma didn't know it yet, but overnight, I became her lender. I now controlled the single most important asset in her life, the $30 million home she believed made her untouchable. And I wasn't going to use that power right away. No, I was going to wait. The tighter she clung to the illusion of success, the more devastating it would be when I ripped it away. Weeks turned into months, and I kept feeding the silence. Emma's expenses grew while her reputation started to crack. Invitations stopped coming. Her friends began to drift away. Her smile on social media looked brighter than ever, but I could see the cracks in her eyes. The desperation. The unease she tried so hard to hide. And still, I waited. Because revenge isn't about how fast you strike. It's about making sure the blow is so precise, so unexpected, that your enemy doesn't even have time to scream before the walls collapse around them. I knew Emma thought she'd taken everything from me. But in reality, I had taken control of everything that mattered to her. Her friends, her finances, her future. The game had shifted. I was no longer the father who gave her everything. I had become the shadow pulling every string. And she was dancing, beautifully unaware, right into the fire I built for her. Revenge is never about the first strike. It's about the timing. And after months of preparation, the moment had finally arrived to turn up the heat. Emma had no idea her entire empire was balancing on a thread I controlled. To the world, she still looked untouchable, the glamorous heiress with a mansion, wealth, and power. But beneath the glitter, I had built cracks into every part of her foundation. Now, all I had to do was wait for her to step on them. I started small, subtle, invisible, just like before. One quiet afternoon, I made a single call to the private bank holding Emma's accounts. Within hours, 2 of her credit lines were suspended for review. She'd been overspending far beyond her declared income, and I made sure the right algorithm flagged her profile. The timing was perfect. That weekend, she was hosting a massive rooftop party for her so-called friends. It was meant to be her biggest event yet, champagne towers, hired DJs, private chefs flown in from Paris. Except halfway through the night, her payment to the caterers bounced. I didn't have to be there to know how it went down. I could imagine it perfectly. Emma standing in her sparkling gown, holding a glass she couldn't afford, while the chef demanded immediate payment in front of dozens of people. The whispers, the stares, the subtle smirks, vultures smelling blood. Her pride wouldn't let her show panic, but inside, I knew cracks were forming. After that night, things started spiraling, carefully, beautifully, exactly as I planned. First, one of her luxury car leases got terminated after a late payment triggered an automatic review. A week later, her financial manager, the one she trusted to handle her endorsements, suddenly resigned. I made sure of it by offering him a discreet position with one of my companies. Then came the endorsements. I reached out to one of my contacts at a marketing agency tied to several of her sponsorship deals. With a single meeting and a quiet investment, 3 of her biggest contracts were put on hold for internal restructuring. Overnight, half of her income dried up. I could almost hear her pacing through the marble halls of her mansion, trying to figure out what was happening. Emma's friends were the easiest part of the plan. The moment whispers began circulating that she was drowning in debt, the parasites started peeling away one by one. Suddenly, the endless invites stopped coming. The private yacht trips, the expensive vacations, the high-profile parties, all those doors started closing. I made sure of it. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. By feeding just enough information into the right gossip circles, I turned her closest allies into quiet enemies. They didn't need convincing. They were never there for Emma anyway. They were there for what she had. And when they believed the money was drying up, they left faster than rats escaping a sinking ship. Emma wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. 3 months into the slow burn, Emma's once bustling mansion was growing quieter by the day. No more rooftop parties. No more endless laughter echoing through the glass walls. The staff started leaving, one by one, when she could no longer afford to keep them all. The once gleaming infinity pool grew dull without constant maintenance. The silence inside that massive house must have been deafening. And yet, Emma refused to believe anything was wrong. Her pride wouldn't let her. She doubled down on social media, posting filtered photos of old vacations and rented jewelry, trying to convince the world, and maybe herself, that she was still winning. But every like, every comment, every fake compliment she clung to was just another chain tightening around her neck. For months after I planted the first seeds, I made the move that would seal her fate. Remember the loan she took against the Miami mansion? I owned it now, quietly, secretly, completely. Up until then, I'd been patient, keeping payment steady so she wouldn't suspect anything. But that morning, I instructed the bank to demand full repayment of the outstanding balance, a number she couldn't possibly cover, not even if she sold every handbag, every bracelet, and every fake friend she had left. The notice arrived at her doorstep on a Tuesday. I didn't need to be there to know the look on her face when she saw it, confusion first, then disbelief, and finally, panic. Because if she couldn't pay, the house, her precious $30 million empire, would be gone. That evening, my phone rang. It was Emma. For a long time, I just stared at the screen, her name glowing like a ghost from another life. My chest felt heavy, my fingers twitching with the urge to pick up. Some part of me, the part that still remembered bedtime stories and scraped knees, wanted to answer. But I didn't. She called again the next day. And the day after that. 23 missed calls in 3 days. I let every single one go unanswered. Revenge isn't just about taking back what's yours. Sometimes, the silence hurts more than any words ever could. I started hearing things through mutual acquaintances, stories about Emma becoming more withdrawn, more paranoid. Her credit cards kept declining. The lenders she relied on stopped approving her requests. Her friends stopped showing up altogether. And then came the headlines. Socialite's mansion faces foreclosure. Lavish lifestyle crumbles amid debt scandal. Emma's picture was splashed across every gossip site. The same people who once praised her now mocked her. The vultures that once circled her table at parties now fed on her downfall. And she still didn't know I was the one pulling every single string. By the 6th month, Emma's world was in free fall. She was selling off jewelry, cancelling subscriptions, begging for extensions from people who no longer cared about her. But I wasn't done yet. I didn't just want her to lose the house. I wanted her to feel what I felt the night she kicked me out of my flat, powerless, invisible, disposable. And when the moment came, when the final blow landed, I wanted her to know exactly whose hand had been guiding it all along. That moment was coming soon. She had no idea the fire was already licking at her feet. 6 months had passed since Emma kicked me out of my own flat. 6 months of silence, strategy, and shadows. I watched her life fall apart piece by piece, not with anger, but with precision. I dismantled her world quietly, leaving no fingerprints behind. Her mansion had grown cold, her friends had vanished, her credit was shattered, and her once golden name was now whispered in pity at the same parties where she used to be worshipped. But this wasn't the end. This was only the setup for the final push, the moment where I'd rip away the last thing she thought she could cling to. The Miami mansion wasn't just her home. It was her identity, her stage, her armor against the world. To her, losing it wasn't an option. It was unthinkable. Which was why I made sure I owned every brick of it without her knowing. I had quietly purchased the banknote on the mansion months earlier, hidden beneath layers of shell companies. On paper, the owner of Emma's $30 million loan was a faceless investment group in the Cayman Islands. In reality, it was me. Every bill she paid went to me. Every late fee, every penalty, every extension request, I saw it all. I had the power to erase her comfort with one signed document. But I hadn't used it yet. I wanted her desperation to reach its peak before I delivered the blow. By this point, Emma was cornered. She'd sold jewelry, pulled out personal loans, begged banks for breathing room. I heard whispers of her attempting to pitch a lifestyle brand, hoping to monetize her fading influence, but investors weren't biting. Her old friends had abandoned her completely. The parties were gone, the lights were off, the endless champagne had run dry. The mansion, once filled with laughter and music, now echoed with emptiness. I imagined her wandering those marble hallways at night, staring out at the endless ocean, wondering where it all went wrong. And still, I waited. Because the longer she fought to hold on, the harder she would fall when the ground finally disappeared beneath her. It happened on a rainy Friday evening. Emma received an official foreclosure notice delivered straight to her doorstep. A single sheet of paper declaring that unless she paid the outstanding balance in full, the property would be repossessed. I know exactly what she did that night. I wasn't there, but I didn't have to be. She called her bank. Denied. She called her financial advisor. Gone. She called her friends. No one picked up. And finally, she called me. I saw her name flash on my screen. For a moment, I stared at it, frozen between the man I used to be and the man I had become. Somewhere deep inside me, the father who used to carry her on his shoulders at the park wanted to pick up, to comfort her, to save her. But then I remembered the eviction notice she had sent me. I remembered standing outside my flat, bags in my hands, feeling like a stranger in my own life. I let the call ring until it went silent. 2 days later, it happened. I was in my new penthouse overlooking the river, one of the many properties Emma didn't know I owned, when the concierge called. "She's here," he said. "Emma." I told them to let her up. When the elevator doors opened, I almost didn't recognize her. The perfectly polished daughter I once knew was gone. Her hair was messy, her makeup smudged, her posture fragile. Her designer handbag hung from her shoulder like a burden too heavy to carry. For a moment, we just stared at each other in silence. There was no smile, no warmth, no traces of the bond we once had. She stepped into the room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor like soft echoes of a life slipping away. I could see it in her eyes, exhaustion, fear, and something she would never admit out loud, regret. She asked for help. I stayed silent. She begged me to save her from losing the mansion, saying it was the only thing she had left. I let her speak, let her pour every ounce of pride out of her trembling voice. And when she finished, I looked her straight in the eye and told her the truth. I told her I was the one holding her loan. That every dollar she owed to me. That the foreclosure notice came from my signature. For a few seconds, she didn't breathe. I could see the realization hit her like a tidal wave, flooding her face with shock and devastation. She whispered something, but her voice cracked. Her hands shook, clutching the edge of the table for balance. For the first time since she betrayed me, she had no words. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice once. I told her I wasn't going to save her. Not this time. I told her that the mansion, the life, the image she built on arrogance and betrayal was gone. And then I did something that broke her more than any foreclosure ever could. I offered her a deal. She could walk away quietly. No legal battles. No court drama. But she had to give me my Manhattan flat back, the home she had stolen from me. She agreed. She didn't argue, didn't resist. She just nodded slowly, defeated, her once fiery spirit reduced to silence. I watched her sign the papers with trembling hands, the weight of her choices finally crushing her. When she left my penthouse, she didn't look back. I stood by the window, watching her walk to the elevator, her shoulders heavy, her head down. She disappeared behind the sliding doors like a ghost retreating into the past. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of balance, not joy, not triumph, but closure. The mansion would be mine within weeks. The flat was already mine again. And Emma. Well, Emma was left with the one thing she tried so hard to avoid, reality. But this wasn't the end of her story. Not yet. Because losing the mansion was just the beginning of what she was about to face. I wasn't done teaching her the cost of betrayal. Not yet. After Emma walked out of my penthouse that day, there was silence. Not just in the room. Not just in my heart. But in her entire life. I knew it because I orchestrated it. The moment she signed over my Manhattan flat, I filed the final paperwork to seize the Miami mansion. Within a week, the notice went public. Property foreclosure approved. The same gossip sites that once praised Emma for her lavish lifestyle now plastered her face under headlines filled with pity and mockery. Every comment, every caption, every whisper chipped away at the image he had built, the image he had traded our relationship for. But this wasn't about humiliation for me. This was about balance. And for the first time in months, I was in control again. By the end of the month, Emma was officially locked out of the mansion. The gates that once opened automatically at the sight of her now ignored her completely. Her security access codes were disabled. The staff she used to command reported to me now, and I instructed them to cut all ties with her. The house itself stood quiet and untouched, like a monument to arrogance and consequences. Every glittering chandelier, every sleek glass wall, every marble tile. All mine. Emma tried to fight it at first. She called lawyers, begged banks, even tried reaching out to people she once thought were her friends. But influence built on illusion collapses fast. Nobody wanted to be associated with a falling star. For the first time since she'd moved into that house, Emma was alone. Word got around fast in her circles. Invitations stopped. Partnerships dried up. Brands quietly removed her name from deals and contracts. Her so-called friends, the same crowd that used to drink her champagne and swim in her infinity pool, were already at the next mansion, laughing behind closed doors. Without the mansion, without the endless parties, without the expensive dresses and jewelry, Emma wasn't the center of attention anymore. To the world she once ruled, she had become invisible. That, more than losing the house, broke her. I heard whispers from mutual acquaintances. She had rented a small apartment in a run-down part of the city. No staff. No chefs. No drivers. No personal assistants. Just her. And silence. Weeks passed before she reached out again. This time, it wasn't anger. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't the voice of the daughter who kicked me out of my flat like I was nothing. It was desperation. Her messages were short, hesitant, fragile. She wanted to talk. To explain. To fix things. I didn't reply. Not out of hatred. Not out of cruelty. But because I knew this wasn't about me. She wasn't reaching out for forgiveness. She was reaching out because the walls were closing in and there was no one left to hold them up for her. She had chosen her pride over her family. And pride never holds when the foundation crumbles. It was a stormy Tuesday when she appeared at my Manhattan flat, the same one she once kicked me out of. She stood at the door, soaked from the rain, makeup streaked, hair clinging to her face. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The girl who once sparkled like the Miami skyline was now standing in front of me, small, quiet, humbled. I stepped aside and let her in, but the silence between us was heavier than any words could carry. She sat at the kitchen table, looking around the place she once thought was beneath her, tracing her fingers along the same worn wooden surface where we used to share late-night snacks when she was little. I waited. Finally, she spoke. Her voice cracked when she said she didn't recognize herself anymore. That she didn't know how she had gotten here. That everything she built had slipped away like water through her fingers. And for the first time in a long time, I saw something in her eyes I thought I'd lost forever. Regret. But regret doesn't erase betrayal. I listened to her until she finished, then I told her something I had decided months ago. There would be no going back. I wasn't going to rebuild the world she destroyed. I wasn't going to hand her another fortune to burn. I wasn't going to let her drag me back into the chaos she created for herself. I told her she needed to start over. On her own. Her lips trembled, but she didn't argue. There was no fight left in her. For the first time, Emma understood what it meant to stand on her own without the safety net I'd spent my entire life weaving for her. With Emma gone, I focused on rebuilding what she had tried to break. I renovated the Manhattan flat, breathing life back into the place where so many of my memories lived. It wasn't about the property itself, it was about reclaiming the pieces of me she thought she had stolen. The Miami mansion became an investment. I turned it into something profitable, a constant reminder that wealth isn't about showing off, it's about control. And slowly, the weight I'd carried for so long started to lift. Not because I ruined her, but because I finally stopped letting her ruin me. People think revenge is about destruction, but they're wrong. Revenge is about power. It's about rewriting the narrative they thought they controlled. I didn't destroy Emma's life. She did that herself, piece by piece, choice by choice. All I did was hold up the mirror and let her see the reflection she'd been avoiding. She lost her friends. She lost her mansion. She lost the life she thought made her untouchable. But more importantly, she lost me. And that loss? That was something no amount of money, no house, no luxury could ever replace. The last time I saw Emma was 2 months later. She walked past me on a quiet city street, holding a grocery bag, dressed simply, no designer labels, no cameras, no entourage. She looked healthier, calmer, but older somehow, like she'd lived 10 years in 6 months. Our eyes met briefly, and in that moment, we both understood something without saying a word. She was living her new life. And I had reclaimed mine. There was no hatred. No anger. No need for vengeance anymore. The fire had burned out, leaving nothing but ashes. I turned and walked away, and so did she. That was the last time we ever crossed paths. The day Emma walked out of my flat for the last time, the storm inside me finally settled. There was no victory dance. No celebration. No champagne corks flying in the air. Just silence. Revenge doesn't taste sweet the way movies make you believe. It's quieter, heavier, like standing on top of a mountain after a long, brutal climb. You look down at the wreckage below and realize. It wasn't just them who fell. You fell too, piece by piece, along the way. But now, for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't known in a long time. Freedom. I started small. The Manhattan flat, my home, had been stripped of its warmth during Emma's betrayal. The walls felt cold, the air stale, the memories buried under layers of pain. So I tore it apart, not out of anger, but renewal. Fresh paint, new furniture, photographs of the people who still mattered. The renovations weren't just about walls and windows. They were about reclaiming myself, my life, my dignity. I filled the flat with laughter again, dinners with old friends, quiet mornings with coffee by the window, late nights lost in my favorite books. Every corner of that space began to breathe again, like a wound finally closing. I had lost a daughter to greed, but I wasn't going to lose myself. The Miami mansion, the house that started it all, became the centerpiece of my new plan. Instead of selling it, I turned it into a high-end rental property for corporate executives and celebrities. Within months, it became one of the most profitable assets I owned. The same walls that once held wild parties now generated steady streams of income. There was a strange poetry to it. The thing Emma thought symbolized her freedom became my strongest weapon of control, not over her, but over my future. I reinvested the profits wisely, channeling them into startups, sustainable housing projects, and tech firms I believed in. My portfolio grew quietly, steadily, and this time, securely. It wasn't about proving anything to Emma anymore. It was about proving something to myself. I started surrounding myself with people who valued more than what I owned. People who'd been with me through the storms, who didn't care about champagne towers or marble floors. Old business partners reconnected, friends I'd lost touch with came back into my life, and together we began working on something bigger than wealth, purpose. We started a foundation to provide financial education for young adults. Watching kids learn how to save, invest, and avoid the traps that consumed Emma. It gave me something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not the kind built on possessions or appearances, but the kind that comes from helping someone stand taller than you ever did. I rarely heard about Emma anymore. Occasionally, someone would mention spotting her around the city, at a bookstore, at a small cafe, dressed simply, no cameras, no entourage. She kept her head down, and I respected that. I never reached out, and she never tried again after that last rainy night at my flat. There were no more pleas for help, no angry texts, no desperate phone calls. She had chosen her path, and I had chosen mine. And for the first time since this began, our lives finally stopped colliding. There were nights, though, quiet, lonely nights, when I'd sit by the window of my flat and think about writing her a letter. Not to forgive her. Not to apologize. Just to tell her something I wished she understood long ago. That money is fragile. That pride is dangerous. That love, real love, is worth more than everything she lost. But I never sent it. Some lessons aren't meant to be handed to you. They're meant to be earned. As the months turned into a year, I realized something important. I didn't win because Emma lost. I won because I took back control of my life. For too long, I let her choices define me, her betrayal, her arrogance, her greed. But standing here now, on the other side of everything, I finally understood something simple. She didn't break me. She woke me up. I stopped living for someone else's validation. I stopped chasing relationships built on guilt and obligation. I stopped pouring my time and energy into proving my worth to people who would never see it. I learned to live for myself again. One spring morning, I drove past the street where Emma's mansion used to glitter like a monument to vanity. It was quiet now, the house occupied by a new tenant, a family with children laughing in the backyard, chasing bubbles under the warm Florida sun. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled. Because life moves forward, whether you want it to or not. The pain fades, the wounds heal, and the world keeps spinning. The mansion, the betrayal, the revenge, all of it was behind me now. I had my home back. I had my peace back. I had myself back. And sometimes, that's the greatest victory of all. A year had passed since the day Emma walked out of my flat, defeated and silent. 12 months of rebuilding, healing, and learning to breathe again without the weight of betrayal pressing on my chest. I thought I'd closed the chapter completely. I thought I'd moved on. But life has a way of circling back. It happened on a warm spring afternoon. I was walking through Central Park, the city alive with energy, kids laughing on the playground, couples picnicking under trees, street performers playing soft jazz near the fountains. I'd taken a rare day off from work to enjoy the peace I had fought so hard to earn. And then I saw her. Emma. She was sitting on a weathered bench beneath the shade of an old oak tree, dressed simply in jeans and a pale sweater. No designer heels. No flashy jewelry. No entourage snapping pictures for Instagram. She was alone. For a moment, I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Part of me wanted to turn around, to avoid reopening old wounds. But something deeper, quieter, kept my feet rooted to the ground. I stood there, watching her from a distance, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Peace. There were no cameras, no loud laughter, No mask of confidence stretched across her face. She was just Emma, the little girl I used to know, sitting under a tree, watching the world go by. I walked over slowly, my steps deliberate, my heart strangely calm. When she saw me, her eyes widened, not in shock, but in something softer. She didn't look away this time. She didn't stand up and storm off. She didn't hide behind pride or arrogance. She just nodded, a quiet acknowledgement of everything unsaid between us. I sat down beside her, leaving space between us, and for a while, neither of us spoke. The city buzzed around us, but in that moment, it felt like time slowed, trapping us in a bubble of memories we couldn't escape. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was softer now, stripped of the sharp edges it once carried. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She didn't beg. She simply said she was doing better. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I believed her. Emma told me she had found a small job at a local bookstore. It didn't pay much, but she said it made her feel grounded. She liked being around books, liked the quiet. She had moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment and was slowly rebuilding her life, without parties, without followers, without the endless cycle of luxury and validation she once lived for. I listened quietly, letting her words settle in, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anger. I felt relief. Because sometimes, the harshest lessons are the ones we're forced to live through, not the ones we're told. Emma had fallen hard. But she had also started to rise, slowly, steadily, in her own way. When she finished talking, there was silence between us again. A heavy, fragile kind of silence. I realized, sitting there, that I didn't need her apology anymore. I didn't need validation. I didn't need to hear "I'm sorry" to move on. I had already healed. The mansion, the revenge, the humiliation, all of it had brought me to this place, right here, sitting on a park bench next to my daughter. And for the first time, I didn't see her as the woman who betrayed me. I saw her as the little girl who once held my hand as we crossed busy streets. The girl who used to fall asleep on my chest watching old cartoons. The girl who, for all her mistakes, would always carry a piece of my heart. I didn't say any of this out loud. I didn't need to. Some things don't need words. Eventually, we stood up. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carries more history than happiness. And then she walked away, disappearing into the crowd, swallowed by the life she was rebuilding. I stood there, watching her go, and for the first time in years, I felt no bitterness, no resentment, no anger. Just acceptance. Emma was carving her own path now, free of the illusion she once drowned in. And I had my life back, stronger, quieter, and more meaningful than ever. Months later, I visited the Miami mansion one last time. The house stood tall and quiet under the golden sunset, waves crashing softly in the distance. It no longer carried the weight of betrayal for me. It was just property now, an asset, nothing more, nothing less. I stood on the balcony overlooking the ocean, the warm breeze brushing against my face, and I thought about everything I'd been through. The hurt, the anger, the revenge, the healing. And I realized something important. I didn't win because I took everything back. I won because I took myself back. Life has a way of teaching you lessons in the most painful ways imaginable. I learned that money can buy comfort, but it can't buy loyalty. I learned that pride destroys faster than poverty ever could. I learned that love, once taken for granted, can disappear faster than you think. But I also learned that even in betrayal, there's growth. Even in heartbreak, there's strength. Even in endings, there are new beginnings. Emma and I don't talk often now. But sometimes, she sends me a short message, a book recommendation, a photo of a coffee shop she likes, a memory she stumbled upon. I reply with a few words. And that's enough. Because sometimes, moving forward isn't about rebuilding what was broken. It's about learning to live without the pieces you lost. That night, as I sat in my Manhattan flat, my home, my sanctuary, I looked out over the glowing city skyline and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because I got my revenge. Not because I got my properties back. Not because Emma lost what she valued most. But because I had finally stopped fighting battles that were already over. I closed my eyes, letting the city's hum settle into the background, and I whispered to myself the only truth that mattered now. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge is finding peace when they expected you to stay broken. And for the first time since this story began, I believed it. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel.